All right, welcome back to the special business meeting. We're on item 4.1, which is the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And this is the tying it all together. So I'll pass it over to our staff to take us through the presentation.
Great. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Heather Boxrud, General Manager of Financial, IT, and Procurement Services. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joined here today by Laura Turner, Director of Financial Planning and Reporting, and Brianne Sousa, Director of Financial Operations. As well, we have, as you can see, several budget managers in council chambers to support council with any questions you may have. We are here with you today to present the Tying It All Together workshop. The staff recommendation before you today is that council direct staff to proceed with the budget open house on November 7th, 2024, referencing the draft 2025 to 29 financial plan as presented in the report from Financial Services on October 29th, 2024. In terms of agenda, we have a fair bit to cover today. This is the final workshop in developing the draft budget, whereby we tie the discussion and budget components together prior to bringing it to the draft financial plan, prior to bringing the draft financial plan to the budget open house on November 7th. I will provide a brief reminder of where we are in terms of the 25 to 29 financial plan timeline and a review of the guiding principles that staff and council utilize to guide the financial plan recommendations and decisions. We will then review the primary pressures facing the 25 to 29 financial plan and efforts that staff have made to mitigate these pressures. Ms. Turner will review a summary of the 25 to 29 financial plan, including the general fund tax results, the utility rate results, proposed service level changes, proposed projects, and then provide a review of the district's primary reserves. Ms. Sousa will walk us through the borrowing on capital projects that is anticipated over the coming 5 years, and a member of our communications team will join us to highlight the public input opportunities over the next few weeks. Finally, council posed several inquiries and questions during the previous budget workshops over the month of October, and staff are prepared to address these questions at the end of the presentation today. So each year, the district works towards an adoption of the financial plan in December to enable staff to begin work on their projects and programs right away in January of the following year. Shown here is the timeline for the 25 to 29 financial plan. We are currently sitting at the 5th stage of the multi-stage process, presenting the Tying It All Together workshop. The next steps include the budget open house, which will take place on November 7th at Brennan Park from 6 to 8 p.m. And please note this date has been changed from November 6th. Staff will then bring community feedback to the open house, Let's Talk Squamish, and other various community touchpoints to council on November 19th at the What We Heard workshop. And finally, the first 3 readings of the utilities rate bylaw and the 2025 to 29 financial plan will occur on December 3rd and 10th, respectively, with adoption of the financial plan on December 17th. So the district conducts its financial planning process as outlined in the long-term financial plan, guiding principles and financial plan policy, which has 4 principal categories that were developed to guide management and council in the financial planning process. The categories include stable and sufficient, sustainable and equitable, prudent and flexible, efficient and measurable. Further details can be found on the district's guiding principles and long-term financial planning policy, which is available on the district's website at www.squamish.ca. So I have highlighted several challenges facing the 25 to 29 financial plan throughout the stages of the budget workshops. At the risk of repeating myself, but for the benefit of the community that may be joining us for the first time today, please bear with me as I highlight them again. Generally speaking, the district continues to face challenging times financially with increased cost pressures, increased borrowing costs, a growing community with diverse needs, housing shortages, and labor market competitiveness. In addition, the district has several large facility construction projects underway and is navigating the challenges of a new major industry entering into the community. Inflation, supply chain, and supplier availability continue to be a challenge, although inflation is now projecting to ease in coming years. These pressures are still felt across all departments and within all projects. Transit expansion continues to be a community priority and requires an annual investment. The district has invested significantly in the last 5 years in aging facilities with the upgrades to Brennan Park Recreation Center, new fire halls, Valley Cliff Daycare, and Public Works Facility, which has been funded through land reserves, grants, and borrowing. The increased costs associated with borrowing are spread across several years in the 25 to 29 financial plan, particularly in 26 and 27 fiscals. In 2024, the district ratified the Canadian Union of Public Employees 3-year agreement. The costs associated with this agreement have annualization impacts on the 25 to 29 financial plan. In addition, RCMP contracts costs continue to rise and population growth requires further investment in fire services. The district faces a number of disruptors, which include significant labor challenges, primarily around wage pressures, in order to remain competitive with Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, and to attract and retain skilled employees, minimize staff vacancies, and have the necessary resources to execute the district's strategic, operational, and capital plans. The district will continue to execute on several large disruptor initiatives and projects in the 25 to 29 financial plan that required the district's financial and staff resources and include the Chikai Fan debris barrier, the WLNG and Fortis Eagle Mountain Pipeline project, and affordable housing initiatives, including CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund grant, Squamish Housing Action Plan, and the provincial housing legislation changes. As with most BC municipalities, cost of capital increases have outpaced historical asset replacement reserve contributions, including DCC reserves. Through the guidance of the district's asset management plan and asset management reserve funding strategy, the district will continue investment in district efforts towards the proactive management and adequate reserve building efforts of the district's asset management capital program. As well, a major DCC bylaw update is scheduled in 2024 and will take effect in 2025. Staff have taken a thoughtful and measured approach to addressing these challenges and cost pressures. Some highlights include limiting service level changes to high priority and pre-committed changes only. This is after several years of minimal investment due to the focus on labor contract negotiations, pandemic and post-pandemic limitations. The district implemented a new software which has provided better forecasting and analysis tools to review, forecast, and reduce operating costs. This allows the district to absorb inflation and reduce costs across all departmental budgets, which was a critical part of minimizing costs. As the capital plan requirements continue to grow, a major methodology shift and process improvement for the district is to attribute the staff that are focused on capital implementations to be funded by capital projects. This improvement ensures the accurate cost of capital projects is captured and accounted for within the asset management capital program and allows the district the flexibility to scale up resources necessary to execute the capital plan and scale down resources when the capital plan is reduced. Staff have maximized funding opportunities, leveraging external funding sources and utilizing provisions to smooth costs year to year. Staff continue to apply rigor to the project prioritization when scheduling projects within the financial plan, which prioritizes risk, including critical asset replacement risk, projects that address health and safety concerns or address a high degree of financial risk. As well, the process prioritizes legislation, strategic plan, and master plan projects while considering funding limitations and staff capacity. The district improved cash flow management processes to include temporary borrowing, which allows the district to delay large long-term debt issuance by managing cash flow for construction of capital projects through small short-term temporary borrowing. And with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Brenner.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Laura Turner, Director of Financial Planning and Reporting. My pronouns are she, her, so I could be addressed accordingly. This slide illustrates the projected tax impact over the next 5 years for the draft 2025 to 2029 financial plan, which is on average a 10.5% increase annually after non-market change. Understandably, these are challenging numbers, particularly in 26 and 27, when the borrowing costs of facilities construction are issued. However, staff are hearing similar early numbers from other small to medium communities in BC. Common themes are the rising cost of RCMP, which are having large financial impacts at the local government level, fire services requirements and the associated costs, ongoing labor contract negotiations, which are adding financial pressures, and increased responsibilities from provincial mandates in the housing and affordable housing arena, which are increasing costs to local governments across BC. For 2025, the general fund tax revenue requirement in the draft financial plan is estimated at 9.6% net of non-market change, which represents a $250 increase to the average residential taxpayer. This increase is made up of the key elements on this slide and includes pre-committed operating revenues and expenses of 6%, changes in debt servicing costs of 0.8%, service level changes and special operating projects of 3.4%, asset management reserve funding of 2.4%, and an estimated non-market change reduction of 3%. For 2025, service level changes funded by taxation total $1.4 million, which represents a 3.4% tax increase or $88 to the average residential taxpayer. Details can be found in attachment 1 of the RTC and include a $637,000 increase for fire services, a $60,000 increase for police municipal employees, a $103,000 increase for transit expansion, $236,000 for the exempt staff P60 wage adjustment, $68,000 for library services, and a $466,000 increase for other departments. For utilities, staff are proposing the following increases to the residential flat utility rates for 2025. An increase of 5.2% for solid waste, which is made up of 5% to fund existing financing costs plus 0.2% as per the asset management reserve funding strategy. It's important to note that the recommended rate increase will not generate sufficient revenues to cover all costs in the fund, and therefore to maintain stable and consistent rate increases, the solid waste reserve will be used to cover debt servicing costs in 2025. An increase of 5.7% for wastewater, which is based on 3.4% as per the asset management reserve funding strategy, plus a further 2.3% increase to meet the basic utility needs. As a result of the management and staff expenditure reallocation, the wastewater reserve will be used to cover increased costs in 25 and 26 to maintain stable and consistent rate increases. And an increase of 1.8% for water, which is based on the recommendation of the asset management reserve funding strategy and assumes additional revenue from growth in customers is sufficient to cover increased costs of the utility. At the Utilities Budget Workshop on October 22nd, Council requested further information regarding cost offsets within the water fund that resulted from the reallocation of 2 FTEs from the water fund to the wastewater fund. The savings generated in the salaries budget from these positions were redistributed across several other expense budgets to help offset increases in those areas. This includes QP union contract increases of positions remaining in the water fund, engineering expenditures, contract and consulting expenditures, including well maintenance, operational health and safety control measures, water supply intake cleanout, mechanical and maintenance expenditures, supplies and materials, diesel, hydro, and insurance. Special operating projects are detailed in attachment 2 of the report to council and total $19.5 million over the 5 years of the financial plan. $7 million is budgeted for 2025, including $6.4 million for the general fund, $300,000 for water, $75,000 for wastewater, and $242,000 for solid waste. Capital projects are detailed in attachment 3 of the report to council and include $230 million over the 5 years of the financial plan. $60 million is budgeted for 2025, including $50.2 million for general fund, $4.1 million for water, $5.2 million for wastewater, and $640,000 for solid waste. I also just want to highlight on this slide the special operating projects for wastewater total $75,000 over the 5-year plan. However, there's a small typo in the report to council which notes a total of $388,000. So that figure was prior to the removal of the wastewater utility operator position. As mentioned, general fund special operating projects total $18.1 million, which includes 11.6 million for large externally funded operational initiatives not within the district's normal course of business. Excluding these externally funded projects, the total cost is 6.4 million over the 5 years of the plan, with just under 2 million to be spent in 2025, funded by taxation of 210,000, government grants of 890,000, reserves of 781,000, and other anticipated grant funding of 90,000. General fund capital projects totaled 155 million over the 5 years of the financial plan. For 2025, the total budget was 50 million and will be funded by small external sources of 148,000, development cost charges of 3.5 million, federal and provincial grants of 8.7 million, borrowing of 13 million, community amenity contributions of 1.75 million, and 23 million from district reserves. For utility projects included in the 25 to 29 financial plan, funding sources include the Solid Waste Capital Reserve, the Wastewater Capital Reserve, and Water Capital Reserve. The reserves are to be used to fund new works, extensions or renewals, or to purchase equipment for their respective fund. Revenue comes into the fund as transfers from the general fund, as well as surplus within the fund at the end of the fiscal year. And expenses mainly include projects in the 25 to 29 financial plan. As shown on this slide, for 2025, the Solid Waste Reserve has a projected opening balance of $1 million, plus revenues of 48,000, less project funding of 817,000 for a closing balance of just 283,000. At the end of the 5 years of the financial plan, the projected ending balance is 1.6 million. For 2025, the Wastewater Reserve has a projected opening balance of 1.6 million, revenues of 3.1, less projected funding of 4.5 million, for a closing balance of just 309,000. At the end of the 5 years of the financial plan, the projected ending balance of Wastewater Reserve is 1.3 million. And for 2025, the Water Reserve has a projected opening balance of 8 million, revenues of 2.4 million, less project funding of 4.4 million, for a closing balance of 6.1 million. At the end of the 5 years of the plan, the projected balance is 8.3 million. For general fund projects included in the financial plan, there are several funding sources, including district reserves. Most notably used are the general capital, equipment replacement, and land sale reserves. General capital reserve is to be used to fund new works, extensions, or renewals of existing works, and to purchase equipment. Revenue into the fund comes mainly from proceeds from the sale of property, interest earnings, and contributions from the general fund under the asset management reserve funding strategy. And expenses are projects in the 25 to 29 financial plan. For 2025, the general capital reserve has a projected opening balance of 2.4 million, plus revenues of 4.5, less project funding of 5.4 million, for a closing balance of 1.6 million. At the end of the 5 years of the financial plan, the projected ending balance of the capital reserve is 14.7 million. Next, the equipment replacement reserve is to be used to fund the replacement of designated equipment. Revenue is mainly from annual contributions from the general fund and interest earnings. And for 25, the equipment replacement reserve has a projected opening balance of 5.4 million, plus revenues of 840,000 and funding of 1.1 million, for a closing balance of 5.1 million. At the end of the 5 years of the financial plan, the projected ending balance is 4.3 million. And lastly, the land sales reserve is to be used for acquiring land for municipal purposes, new capital works, and extensions and renewals of existing works. Revenues is mainly from the proceeds from the sale of municipal land and interest earnings. For 2025, the land sale reserve has a projected opening balance of 6.2 million, revenues of 13 million, less expenses of 15.9 million, for a projected close of 3.4 million. Over the 5 years of the financial plan, the reserve has a projected ending balance of 2.1 million. And I'll now turn it over to Rian Sousa.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Rian Sousa, and I'm the Director of Financial Operations at the District. To assist with addressing me, my pronouns are she and her. So I'm going to walk through funding projects through borrowing. The district funds capital projects through several funding sources, one of which is borrowing. During the construction phase of a capital project, the district utilizes working capital and temporary borrowing to finance projects. Once a project is complete, long-term borrowing is issued. The issued borrowing is an operating cost and therefore is funded by operations. As a BC municipality, the district has the advantage of being able to borrow from the Municipal Finance Authority. The Municipal Finance Authority is a nonprofit organization that offers low-cost financing to municipalities in BC. Further, the district strategically chooses to fund capital projects through borrowing, as funding capital projects through borrowing ensures that taxpayers receiving the benefit are also contributing to paying for the costs. The district is legislatively limited on how much borrowing it can have authorized at any one time. The community charter limits the district to a 25% debt servicing limit. District policy further limits the district's debt servicing limit to a maximum of 20%. To note, debt servicing is defined as the annual principal and interest payments. The additional borrowing required to support the district's 2025 to 2029 financial plan brings the district's debt servicing to 17.6%. I will now turn the presentation back to Laura Turner.
Thank you. So during the previous financial planning workshops, Council had a number of questions and requested additional information on projects, revenues and expenses, and reserves, which staff will address now, starting with finance-specific questions. So at the special operating and capital budget workshop, October 15th, Finance was asked to provide additional information on the carbon neutral reserve and the environmental reserve fund. For the carbon neutral reserve, revenue into the reserve is received from the provincial local government climate action program of approximately $150,000 per year, which is to be spent on funding local climate action projects. For 2025, the projected opening balance of the reserve was at $380,000, plus the funding of $150,000 and expenses of $179,000 for a projected ending balance of $350,000 in 2025. Projects include the Climate Action Energy Specialist and the Home Energy Retrofit Assist Program. For the Environmental Reserve Fund, revenue into the reserve comes from developments that provide compensation for either tree removal permitted through tree management permits or vegetation removal with an environmentally sensitive area under an environmental development permit. The funds received are kept in the reserve and are to be spent on habitat improvements. For 2025, the projected opening balance is $253,000, less expenses of $20,000 for an estimated ending balance of $233,000 for 2025. These project costs have not been operationalized because they're funded by a limited amount of funds held in the reserve rather than being funded by annual taxation. Council also requested detailed information on the cost estimate for the Public Works Facility project prior to adoption of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan, as the detail requested will include subtrade proprietary and confidential information. The discussion will not be held in public. Staff are currently working on that request, and a summary of the cost estimate will be provided to the public in advance of the financial plan approval. I'll now turn the presentation back over to Rianne Sousa. Yes.
At the October 8th special meeting, Council requested staff bring back an analysis between the 2025 year and the 2024 to 2028 financial plan compared to the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. This slide represents the comparison. Prior to highlighting the key differences, I'd like to note that the 2024 to 2028 financial plan column was reformatted to be consistent with the 2025 to 2029 financial plan presentation. The 2025 total revenue generated from existing taxpayers is 9.6% in both the 2024 to 2028 financial plan and the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. However, the percentage increase in pre-committed and service level changes differ. The differences are primarily due to greater than anticipated RCMP contract increases, less than anticipated debt servicing costs due to capital project completion dates being extended, greater than anticipated fire service staffing costs due to an update to the fire services 5-year plan, and the addition of the Mamquam Bridge service level change. I'll now turn the presentation over to Bill Stoner.
Thank you. Bill Stoner, General Manager of Corporate Services. There were two questions that I can address from previous meetings. The first had to do with the decommissioning, I guess, of two existing buildings through the capital process. One was the field house, the other one was the animal shelter. And the question was, would there be waste reduction involved in that? And I'm not sure why I had to take that one away. Waste reduction is absolutely part of every project that we're doing, and we're certain, I am certain we will do it with this one. The exact detail, the capital team won't know until they dig into it, but there will be waste reduction on both those projects. The second question had to do with the field house. The budget last year for that was 2.5 million, and then we were able to acquire an existing building and move it on site, and we would expect a smaller budget for this year, and the budget is smaller. It is currently 1.25, so half of what it was. As an initial budget, we do expect that it will likely come in lower, but our estimates at this point are very, very early. We won't know until we have detailed designs of exactly what those costs will be. I'm unsure of who I'm turning. Pascal.
Hi, everybody. Pascal St. Louis, General Manager of Public Safety. I only have one question to bring forward. So there was a question that was brought up about, are there concerns regarding campgrounds in residential areas? So our response to that is bylaw has not received complaints related to campgrounds. For example, the Mamquam River Campground is located in proximity to a residential area. Most of our bylaw related complaints pertaining to camping are typically related to illegal camping activity. And I think I'm passing this on to Ms. Latimer.
Thank you. My name is Megan Latimer. I'm the General Manager of Community Services here at the district. My pronouns are she and her. I have a number of questions to go, information for questions from council to go through with you. I'm going to start with some information on the proposed pedestrian bridge service level change. Council had asked that staff bring back some history and a plan for the next steps around this. So the pedestrian bridge was part of an overall package of community benefits and infrastructure proposed by the Sea and Sky, or formerly Waterfront Landing, developer at the time of rezoning. A previous council accepted this proposal in 2017 through the execution of a land development agreement, which establishes the timing for the developer to complete construction of a package of amenities. The pedestrian bridge, along with the waterfront park being constructed adjacent to the Sea and Sky development, are both being designed and built at the expense of the developer and are meant to serve all residents of Squamish. The pedestrian bridge operation is governed by a strict set of operating parameters and terms and conditions, which are approved by Transport Canada and authorized under the Navigation Protection Program. These parameters must be in effect for a period of at least 1 year and include being able to operate the bridge 24/7 within a 10 to 30-minute window, depending on the time of day and the season. It also includes rigorous data collection requirements on each bridge operation, so the opening and closing of the bridge, including the date, the tide conditions, time of the lift request and opening, time required for a vessel to transit, number of vessels transiting, and time of the lift closure. Following 1 year of bridge operations, the district may submit a request to Transport Canada to review and adjust these parameters based on data collected during that first year of operation. And remote operation of the bridge may be considered at a future date. However, it must be approved by Transport Canada. Staff are estimating that the initial year of operation will be around $250,000 prorated to an early spring commissioning and inclusive operations, training, and data collection. The same rate is expected for 2026. So $275,000 has been earmarked for the full year's operation. And depending on timing of negotiations with Transport Canada. Following this, staff expect a potential reduction in operating costs as set opening and closing times can be established and operations can be more efficiently scheduled. I'll now turn to the other questions for the Community Services Division. So we had questions around the Brennan Park exterior gym relocation and whether it should just be decommissioned. So the outdoor gym equipment is underutilized in its current space. Therefore, staff were initially recommending that it be considered for relocation to an area where it might receive higher use. However, no permanent location has been identified for that yet. With the provisional approval of the splash park by council earlier this month, staff are now recommending that the equipment could stay in its current area as seasonal usage and overall visibility will increase from the co-location of the approved splash park. The gym will be located adjacent and does not interfere with the development of the splash park or a future playground or pool if funding was received for either of those assets. The next question was around the service level change for personnel to operate the new bike lane sweeper. And so although the bike lane sweeper asset is included in the 2025 budget, the service level change for that is in 2026. And this is to account for the delay in actually receiving the sweeper once it's ordered. So it takes into account the procurement and then the build and delivery times, which is about 8 to 10 months. The next question was around what is the incremental cost of a second cricket pitch? And so the consultants that wrote the feasibility report for the cricket pitch recommended budgeting a similar amount as the first. There may be some savings if they were built at the same time, but this is expected to be minimal as it would still require the same amount of equipment and material. So the saving is estimated to be approximately $1,000. The final question in the community services area was, is there a utilities wastewater service level change related to the WLNG flotel? And to provide clarity on that item, this was added when there was still uncertainty about whether WLNG intended to pursue discussions with the district around disposal of liquid waste from the flotel at the district's upgraded wastewater treatment plant, and also if there was going to be need to accept waste from the proposed Fortis work camp. Through their management plans, we understand that WLNG has now committed to disposing of that waste at an improved liquid waste management site outside of the district, and the Fortis TUP for the work camp was not approved, so there is no waste to manage, and the service level change is no longer required.
Great, so that concludes our presentation. So we'll end by highlighting the opportunities for public input. Turn it over to Christina.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Christina Moore, Director of Communications. Just a quick recap of where we are at with public input opportunities. We're well into the period where we have been inviting the public to listen in during the budget discussions and provide comments and ask questions as we go. Let's Talk Squamish.ca is the home for our public engagement online. We have introduced a new tool this year, or an updated tool from last year called Budget Book. It offers the public an opportunity to explore the budget and look at the projects and initiatives that are being proposed to be funded. There are also opportunities within Let's Talk to ask a question, whereby we have been answering them as they have come in, and share a comment. Links to all of these budget workshop materials are also available. We do recognize it is a lot of information to go through, and so it's but it is comprehensive and it is all there, and we're doing our best to answer questions as they come up. Following today, we do anticipate putting together a digital version of this presentation that we will share through our channels for the community to review and receive the recap that you have received today. As well, the community is invited to join us in person for conversations with council through our Coffee with Council series, which kicked off last night and continues tomorrow and Thursday, as well as this Saturday. We will have a budget table at the Seniors Wellness and Information Fair at the 55. And then, of course, looking ahead to next Thursday, November 7th, where we will host the budget open house at Brennan Park. We are looking for questions, comments, at both letstalksquamish.ca and through our email, which is budgetfeedback@squamish.ca. Thank you.
Great. So I'll now turn it back over to council for discussion.
Thank you very much. So council, and I just wanted to point out that we do have Councillor Stoner joining us remote. So just to acknowledge that. And before we get underway, if council could do their best to highlight the page, or if not the specific line item as we're going through questioning, so we can all quickly try to keep up with the line of questioning, that would be helpful. Who would like to get us started with questions? Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. I'm interested in an item that I believe would fall under the pre-committed category. I've had some feedback from residents indicating they don't wish for the District of Squamish to participate in the Sue Big Oil campaign. So just by way of history, Committee of the Whole, October 24th of last year, this was discussed and then brought back to council at the regular meeting on November the 7th. And a motion was passed that reads that council join the Sue Big Oil campaign class action lawsuit and include $1 per resident in the 2025 budget. So I'm interested in the mechanics of how this works. How will this budget item be handled? And I'll leave that super broad question, hear that answer, and I may have follow-ups.
Thank you for the question through the mayor. The budget is currently sitting in the legal, so you're correct, it's under the pre-committed, and there's currently $29,000, $1 for each of residents in Squamish that is earmarked for that legal budget.
Okay, so how would staff communicate in advance, or would staff communicate in advance with the campaign team to alert them that the funds are on the way?
I'm going to chime in on this. The mechanisms there are that should the initiative accumulate enough committed municipalities, totaling, I believe the target was 500,000 residents, at that point it would trigger would sort of set things in motion, and that's when the funds would need to be committed. So I'm hoping to have some clarity before readings as to where this should live, if it's realistic that it should live in 2025, if it should sit perhaps in 2026. I haven't had an update from them as far as timeline goes, but it's not something that as soon as we approve this, there's a check that's written. There's a process that needs to be triggered that would then come back, and that's when at that point those funds would come into play.
Great, thank you. That answers my additional questions.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Councillor Hamilton?
Thanks very much. And thanks for the information on the Public Works building and anticipating further information for December 3rd. or for an upcoming meeting before we see the final approval of the budget. I noted that the Public Works alloc has a roughly 7.8 Public Works building has roughly 7.8 million allocated in 2025, and I'll grab that line number. It's 526,00101. And then an additional 1.3 million allocated in 2026 for the Public Works facility replacement. Considering that we haven't seen the details on the cost escalation from 37 to 38.3 million, could I ask what would be the impact of removing the 1.3 million from the 2026 budget until we see that reasoning or justification for the cost escalation?
Hello. Thank you very much for your question. Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering, now looking over this portfolio in the interim. Regarding the Public Works building, I can speak a little bit more around the cost estimation. So the 37 million that you speak of went into the financial plan last year at a Class B estimate. Now where we're at, we're actually a little bit beyond the Class A. We now have subcontractor bid pricing to verify the costs in front of us. So I think what we're just seeing is just an evolution in that design process, and we have much more certainty on those numbers. The effect of the project on not approving that additional amount is running some risk that we can't proceed with the project and we would lose subcontractor pricing. So this contract is set up in such a way that we have a construction manager on the project who's gone out to tender with pricing and scope. And those are the details which we can bring in a close that can't speak to in the open, but it's an open book process for district staff that we can actually review that pricing, verify it, make sure we're confident with that amount. And this contract is set up quite advantageously that we have that access to subcontractor pricing that we don't always have on some of our other capital projects. So the impact could be detrimental to the project by not approving that additional 1.3 at this stage.
Okay. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for the response. I'm troubled in this instance that we are in a case where it appears we have an escalation that's council has been asked to approve a cost escalation without clarity on where that escalation is coming from and what caused that escalation. I appreciate that detail is expected to come before final approval. So I guess this is maybe not a question for my council colleagues, but a flag for my council colleagues. But given that we have not yet had the information on the details of the reason for this cost escalation, I am likely to put forward a motion today that 1.3 million be removed from the 2026 budget until we hear those details. And at that time, we can make a decision as to whether to put that item back into the budget for 2026. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Stoner next.
Thank you. Through the chair. Apologies, I don't have the line item numbers in front of me. But just following up on one of the responses that Ms. Latimer had with respect to integrating the service level increase that would result from acquiring the new trail cleaning device. Can I confirm that that has been included in the 2026 service level change?
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. It's in the 2026 service level changes.
Okay, and then the 2026 budget also has the addition of a small trail sweeper apparatus. Does that also then result in a new FTE, or is that expected to be the same person that can operate both machines?
Hi, thanks for the question. Through the chair, my name is Jody Barron, the manager of Public Works Operations. As far as I know, the other trails sweeper that is coming will be just a attachment that will be going on a existing piece of equipment. So we will not require another FTE on that.
Okay. Thanks for that clarity. On another line item, which again, I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but there's, I think, 160,000 in the budget for implementation of speed reduction. So this is a question for another set of people, I think, in the room. I'm just wondering if staff can clarify what that 160,000 will deliver, and what level of enforcement that comes with, or if that's just signage changing.
Thank you for the question. Through the mayor, Brett McMurtry, I'm the manager of transportation. So we are coming back to council with a recommendation around speed limit reduction later in November, and the $165,000 that's included in the financial plan is to implement. So yeah, to add signage throughout our community regarding, or sort of depending on what the recommendation or motion from council is later in the fall.
And so just to clarify, does that $165,000 estimate include any level of enforcement through our CMP, or can our bylaw officers enforce new speed limit reductions?
Through the chair, so the budget is just for signage, no enforcement budget. And bylaw officers will not be able to enforce speed limits. That still is the jurisdiction of the RCMP.
Thank you for that clarity. Not to presuppose your forthcoming presentation to council or the council discussion. I guess we'll have three readings for this budget after that discussion. So maybe I'll hold my questions until we have further clarity from staff on this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I'll maybe reorder my questions and possibly get the other half of Councillor Stoner's last question. And it's 5650601 and auto 274. It's the paid parking in 2025. Do we have a sense of the incremental change in terms of parking behavior relative to, we've seen, I think, increased enforcement of the 2-hour parking. And so, this is a significantly more larger investment than the speed reduction. And I'm just trying to sort of understand cost benefit for that investment, given that we are seeing higher enforcement of the 2-hour parking. Or do we have a sense of that, or is that?
Through the chair, if you could clarify in a question, I guess, cost benefit of what?
I guess so. One of my understanding, one of the points aside from revenue generation of paid parking is really managing the available parking. It's a management technique. Do we have a sense of the incremental improvement of that management relative to the 2-hour enforcement? Like, I guess there's a part of me that's sort of thinking, as I've heard there's greater enforcement of the 2-hour parking, are we 80% of what we'd achieve in terms of managing parking availability with that 2-hour enforcement, and we're just getting another 20% better for this sort of expense?
Through the chair, yeah, so as I had identified at one of the previous budget workshops, this is still a placeholder budget. So the ongoing enforcement is one of the parking management tools that we're using, and on council's direction, we've been exploring what implementing a paid parking program would look like. This being a placeholder budget, I can't speak to the effectiveness of enforcement over implementing a program.
Sorry, just if I could on this point, what's the next touch point for council or the community on this particular topic?
Thank you for the question through the chair. We're currently working on bringing a survey to the community to understand how parking is seen and some of the challenges and opportunities with our community, and are targeting for a later in November rollout for that survey. And then we're coming back to council in December, currently scheduled for December 10th, to provide an update to council. So that won't be a sort of full capturing of all of the feedback that we've heard, but to provide an update on the work that we've continued on.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, and it may have been mentioned, I may have just missed it, but we talked about the debt servicing, where we are, the percentage, and what our own policy is and what the provincial rules are. Can someone remind me, it's a percentage of debt relative to what?
Through the mayor, it is a legislated calculation, but just as a brief summary of what the revenue is, it's basically the stable revenue, so property taxation, utilities, and fees. And then the debt servicing is the interest and principal payments. So those are the two key numbers that make up the percentage.
And just to follow up, so grants would not be included in revenue in this case?
Through the mayor, that's a very nuanced question. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. It's very grant dependent.
Thank you. So going back to the gym, the outdoor gym, which is 8450-116, I think I heard that we've decided we can keep it in the same place, but I'm still seeing it in the budget. Is the inference that it will be pulled out before readings, or we still think there's an expense there even though we're keeping it in the same place?
Through the chair, hi everyone. I'm Jay Dale, Director of Recreation and Culture. So the budget line is for minor maintenance to upkeep that equipment. It's been identified that there's some work that's required to bring it up to standard. So the budget line remains.
Okay, and then 8651-201, the Brennan Park tennis and pickleball courts landscaping at 50,000, and I realize this is coming from CACs, but I'm just wondering or looking for clarity on whether this is mostly aesthetic or there's sort of some technical necessity for this landscaping, or.
Thank you, through the chair. The landscaping is actually for the ground stability, in addition to the added benefit of it being aesthetic.
Okay, I'll hold my questions for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions of my own. The Chikai Checkmas confluence work, which is 503-00123. is $150,000 in 2025. I guess the first question, it says funded by reserve. I just wondered what the funding mechanism was for that. And then the follow-up is going to be around how frequently this should happen and how we're planning for that in relation to the protection of the new structure. I don't know if that plays into actually how much that plays into reducing the need to do this in future, but that's what I'm curious about on this one.
Thank you through the chair. The 2025 is funded by the capacity funding from the Chikai barrier. The developer, sorry.
Through the mayor, with respect to clean out frequency of debris at the Chikai Checkmas, it's a very difficult thing to predict. It's based on natural processes and essentially how often and at what volume debris comes down the Chikai River. So currently, the district is working with Squamish Nation and engineering consultants to develop a framework that identifies at what level of debris cleanout needs to happen and what volume, essentially what condition do we need to maintain at the confluence in order to address flood risk. So that's going to provide some greater clarity moving forward on what that program looks like. But again, it's a very difficult thing to budget for because it's a result of unpredictable natural processes, namely debris flows from the Chikai River.
Thank you. So I think that answer, I was trying to get at to see if we needed to have this included in the final year of the financial plan as well as like ongoing maintenance, but it sounds like there's some work underway to establish appropriate timing and other such matters. So I'm comfortable there. Thank you. My next question is around, we received a letter recently from the Chamber of Commerce and they were asking about the grant writing position and the continued support of that. And I just didn't see it in the budget specifically. If someone could speak to where that, the status of that in the context of this budget.
Through the chair, Julie Vengi, General Manager of Community Development. That item is not currently budgeted for in the 2025 to 2029 financial plan.
Okay. I'm going to ponder that one and I'll go back around the room. I have Councillor Stoner actually next in the list.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is a higher level question around how much we're putting or accounting for in non-market change, kind of that estimate of 3%. We know that our building permits are way down this year. And so I'm just curious if staff can speak to why we're continuing to assume that the 3% increase is realistic going forward, as well as for this year.
Thank you through the chair. There's a number of things that go through the non-market change, including development. It typically takes a year or two. So when we see changes in the development building permits, it takes a bit before it becomes part of non-market change. So anytime we know that there's a volume change, that we expect it in 2 to 3 years. So I think it's still a reasonable percentage. We've been over that in several years and just slightly under it. So it's a conservative metric at this point at 3%.
So just to follow up on that, some of our highest tax increases are going to happen in 2 years' time, but we're forecasting a 3% increase given the known decrease in building permits. Has that been accounted for in that estimate going forward?
Through the chair, I'm not sure I'm quite following. Could you provide a little bit more clarity on what you're asking so I can assist?
So you just spoke that there's like typically a few year delay around the construction volume ebbs and flows. we're in a low right now. So that's expected to show up in a year or two, but we're still forecasting a 3% non-market change in 2 years' time, which is also our highest tax increase year. So I'm just wondering why we would still forecast at 3%.
Through the chair, thank you for the clarity. We actually do reduce I believe it's in 2028, we start to reduce it to 2%. It's very difficult to get a good read on non-market change. At this point, we've left it at, and we'll continue to look at it as we get closer to the years. 2 to 3 years out is definitely a difficult forecast at this point. But there is time to change and adapt as necessary, given it's 3 years away.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor French, then Pettingill.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two specific items I wanted to ask about. C365001 is a $2 million fire truck. Planning underway now to determine. So my question is planning underway now to determine the fate of the existing fire truck that this $2 million truck will replace? Will we keep that old truck? Will there be revenue from a sale of, I hate to call it an old truck because I know it's not, however, the old truck.
Through the mayor, my name is Aaron Foote. I'm fire chief with the District of Squamish. To answer your question through the mayor, we do retain the replaced apparatus for a period of 5 years, and it goes into a reserve capacity. So if another engine has a malfunction, we pull it out of service for maintenance, and then this other truck would slide in as a operational apparatus at that point.
Okay, great. So my questions really need to be asked 5 years out. I'll hold off until then, assuming I'm still here. The next item is C8651402. The notes indicate that more grant funding is needed to make the lawn bowling facility improvements happen. So I'm curious to know, on this particular project, are efforts underway by the District of Squamish staff to find some more grant funding for the lawn bowling facility that's over at Eagle Winds?
Through the chair, Jay Dale, Director of Recreation and Culture. So the grant funding that has been provided or identified in that line is provided by the society. There's a gap in terms of doing the project, which is identified as around $15,000. There may be changes to that estimate to do the work because of that quote being done through a contractor that was brought in by the society. So it has to go through a procurement process and an updated process, which is, I think the process was done about a year ago. So additional funds may be required once the procurement process begins.
So that doesn't quite answer my question. Is the District of Squamish looking for additional grant funding to cover the gap that you've just identified?
That I'm unclear about. Maybe I'll throw it over to GM Latimer.
Through the chair, at this point, the District of Squamish is not pursuing additional grant funding. We are in discussions with the society to better understand the needs and what the delta might be.
Okay. It's good for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually going to go to Councillor Anderson. We haven't heard from him yet, and we'll go to Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you, Mayor. My question concerns the Brennan Park Recreation Centre signage replacement. I do have the number handy if that may be of use to you. It is slotted in for 2027 at a cost of $120,000 from reserves. The existing sign, I don't think there's been one in between, was donated by Rainier Canada, operators of the Wood Fibre Pulp Mill in the late 1970s. Of course, we're going to update it with a digitized sign, safer sign for our employees. That company provided materials and in-kind support for the change room for the soccer fields, which has already been referred to today. My question is, how are we prepared with policy and procedure guidelines to receive such donations or in-kind contributions? And I might just indicate this project as an example, this asset replacement type of item.
Thank you through the chair. I believe staff need a few minutes to bring back that question. And perhaps we can circle back near the end.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. Just want to understand the impacts of inflation a little better. I would expect inflation to show up in the reserve fund interest and debt servicing costs. Are there other sort of key areas of our budget that are particularly impacted by inflation? And if so, what level of inflation are we assuming in this? Like, for example, do we expect it would sort of hit our capital budget significantly and we've assumed 2% or whatever? I'm just wondering if you can speak to sort of what areas it would impact and how much.
Through the chair, I can speak to the general operations and perhaps I'll ask one of the capital team to bring up further specific projects. But generally speaking, inflation can hit in all areas of the budget. We would look to typically 2 to 3%, depending on the type. So inflation isn't a general, as much as we speak to it generally, it actually speaks to various types of items, and it can also relate to supplier availability. So generally speaking, we would say if there is any inflation, we would allocate 2 to 3%. Otherwise, it's item by item. We have, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have actually gone through all of the operating budgets and trying to absorb inflation wherever there's been trends, where there has been budgets that could have been unspent or not necessarily needed. So we have taken that approach to inflation generally.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I'm looking at is sort of pre-committed increases and sort of understanding what those are. And the 2026, 2027, 2028 numbers in particular are uncomfortable. And I'm sort of wondering, is there changes we could or should be making this year to help address those subsequent years? Like, do we need to make changes now, or can we make hard choices in future budgets if we need to? Looking at the pre-committed and so on, I don't have the sense that twisting dials now is going to have a material impact on those years. We're going to have to look at special operating and so on in those years. Is that a correct assessment, or are there knobs we could turn now if those numbers are particularly concerning, or knobs we should be turning now, or it's going to be too late next year to do them?
Thank you for the question through the mayor. So pre-committed by definition is pre-committed, and it really comes down to it's very little discretion, if any. So to your point, not a lot of knobs to turn to dial that down, but certainly every decision going forward will have future impacts, and I think that is the probably the most prudent way to address future pre-committed changes is to be thinking about every decision that's in front of you and the costs associated with that and the downstream impacts on future years. In terms of where staff can assist, I think that has a lot to do with the reports to council in terms of relaying the future impacts on every decision.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Just one more question around 2 service level maintenance positions that are in the capital budget. So Auto 283 and Auto 291, the IT application support specialist and the communications manager. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to why these are falling under the capital budget. I do appreciate the move that we've made to try and move relevant FTEs to capital budgets where appropriate, but both of these descriptions seem very operational in nature and across the entirety of the organization. So can staff just speak to why they're landing in capital as opposed to operating?
Thank you. Through the chair. Generally speaking, again, I'll speak to them, both positions generally. They are, in fact, escalations due to increased capital. So all of our information technology projects require implementation resources that can be capitalized. When those resources or when that capital plan would go down, those resources would go down, and that's that scalability. Similarly, in communications, several of the projects that we, particularly the high profile and larger projects, require a significant amount of communications team, and we do allocate those costs to the implementation of those capital projects, and again can be scaled accordingly.
And then specifically on the communications for major
Councillor Stoner,
appreciate the addition of this resource. I think we've had a few.
Sorry, Councillor Stoner, if you could maybe turn your video off. You're clipping and we're losing you there, and I'll let you in. And if you want to try again.
Yeah, is that any better?
It is.
Great, thanks. In terms of the communications manager, I think that this is a helpful description, and definitely with some of our larger capital projects makes good sense. I'm just wondering if staff can speak a little bit to some of our lessons learned in terms of how we communicate, especially around Brennan Park for some of the upcoming changes, and what our level of expectation is for communicating out to the public on those major capital investments. So for example, we have an email to council around communication around the turf replacement. I know that we had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of the use of the auditorium at Brennan Park for grad last year. So how do we communicate with the various user groups through these major capital projects?
Through the chair, Councillor Stoner, I'm going to try to paraphrase what I think I'm asking you, just because you are breaking up a little bit in the audio. So I think you're asking in terms of the specific facilities projects and the renovations and related impacts of those renovations on user groups and how we're communicating with those user groups. Is that accurate? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I would say that specifically with user groups, there's a combined effort with the recreation team, given that the relationships with a lot of those user groups do sit with the recreation team. I think certainly, as it speaks to these major capital projects and others, our staff work gets allocated and divided up across a number of different projects. So, support is offered potentially through the communications team to sort of help with key messaging and development of materials that may then get passed along through our recreation team to the users that they work with directly. So it's, in this particular situation with this new manager position, it isn't necessarily that this new manager will speak directly to those people, but will be able to support an overall capacity increase of communications needs and requirements as these facility projects and major projects move forward, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Through the chair, I just wanted to go back to the field house at Brennan Park, line item 845000103. And I'm just looking for some clarity on what impact this line item has on the construction of the splash park.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Elaine Naseby, Parks Planner. Thank you for the question. The Fieldhouse offers some synergies with the splash park so that the mechanical room doesn't have to stand alone. It can be within that building, and the footprint of the Fieldhouse is adjacent to the splash park, so it doesn't impact the splash park in a negative way. They work together.
Okay, yeah, I guess what I'm asking is if we remove this line item, does it impact the construction of the splash house? Like, can we still put the sorry, I can't remember what you just used, but the mechanics, can we still put it in the field house? Is that already accounted for in the splash park budget, or is that more in this line item?
Through the chair, the Fieldhouse building is required for the mechanical room. Also, the Vancouver Coastal Health permitting process for the splash park requires a washroom and change room that is in a certain distance from the splash park. Because our other Fieldhouse is nearing its end of life, we do need that facility to be near the splash park.
And so just to sum it up, we pretty much need this to be in tandem with the splash park.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. My understanding is if you hire a Vancouver roofing company and they come up and do your roof, they should have they need a business license in Squamish. Just maybe I'll confirm that assumption before I continue. Is that accurate?
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct. Any business that operates in Squamish requires either a resident or non-resident business license.
Okay, thank you. And so it's a little bit anecdotally, but looking at the number of trucks and the logos and the license plates and so on, it seems that there's a whole bunch of small operators related to the Fortis and Woodfibre projects in town. And I didn't see, I guess my question is there a bump in business license revenue, which I would expect and which line item would that be? Or do we have a compliance issue? And because I would be expecting to see a bump somewhere from a whole bunch of business licenses from small operators, which seems to be quite a number of.
Through the mayor, or through the chair, apologies. We have seen consistent increases in our business license revenue over the last couple of years. I don't think we have enough information to comment whether that is directly associated with the Fortis or Woodfibre LNG projects. That would take quite a bit of analysis to run for the business licenses that have been approved and figure out which companies work on the project.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of less interested in which specific companies they are and more, I would expect a bump starting this year and trending in our sort of budget estimates sort of over and above normal because of this project. And so if we haven't seen that, or if we're not projecting that, I wonder, it makes me think there's a compliance issue or we're missing something, because it seems like there's a lot, and maybe I'm mistaken there. Can you clarify which line item that would show up, that sort of revenue, where it would show?
Through the chair, any of the revenue in the operations would just roll under the general fund operations budget.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Hamilton, and we're working our way towards a break, which staff is going to use to address a couple of our pieces we haven't had the fulsome answers for yet. So I'm going to go to Councillor Hamilton, but if anyone else would like anything addressed prior to the break, because it may require some conversation in the timeout, now would be the time to let me know. Otherwise, we're going to go to break after Councillor Hamilton's line of questioning.
Thanks very much. And this is following on from one of Councillor Stoner's comments, questions about the turf field. We have had some requests for communication on the turf field. Do we know when the turf field will be completed? Do we have an estimated timeline for that completion?
Through the chair, Jay Dowd, Director of Recreation and Culture. The estimated timeline has been pushed from the original time just due to construction delays and weather impacts. We've received recent notification as of early as this week as hopefully being done within 1 to 2 weeks. The last couple weeks of completion can be difficult to estimate the exact time because of weather related impacts, but that's what we're hoping for.
Okay, and I assume that all these updates are being communicated to the relevant stakeholders. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, and my second question is also about Brennan Park, but onto the field house. The general motivation of my question here is not about the field house itself. I asked a year ago about the $2.5 million that had been allocated for this year towards the field house. And I was assured that we would see a detailed cost estimate of that budget, that construction project, before we approve it. And I hope you can see my general concerns here are that I want to see clear and articulate plans for major construction projects before we go into that final year of approval. Of course, line items 3-4 years down the line, we have to spend money to do the planning. Totally understand that. But we've now got a line item, the field house, that 2 weeks ago was at 2.5 million and is now 1.25 million. And I haven't yet seen any detailed cost estimates for where that 1.25 million is being spent. I absolutely appreciate that we've done an amazing job of acquiring a building, but I still have concerns that this is a placeholder budget for a project, a major construction project that's expected to be completed this year. Add to that this project is dependent on the splash park, leads us down a difficult road of being able to say or control the budget on this item. Can you speak to when will this budget line item when will we see clarity on how this 1.25 million is planned to be spent?
Yeah, through the chair. I'll get there. I'll work my way there. Just a reminder that we had to significantly change course on this because we saved a significant amount of money by bringing a building on site. When we did that, all the planning that we'd done for the previous one was out the window. So we are almost sort of starting again. Where we are right now, we'd spoken earlier about some changes in management of this area. We are a little bit starting again. I can't give you the exact date, but what I do know is before we go ahead with this project, we will bring those figures to you. This is, unfortunately, a little bit of a placeholder budget because of those changes that I suggested. It is a placeholder budget that is half of the previous budget that's coming from CACs, but it is, to your point, a little bit of a placeholder budget because we are saving a lot of money.
Okay. I'm going to I just one question before we go here. I was curious around if we could get the number of what's left in council contingency, and I wonder if it was appropriate. If I'm thinking about this grant writing position, I'm just wondering if 20 like our current council contingency could be used for the grant writing position to be delivered by the chamber in next fiscal, or if we need to. I'm just trying to figure out ways to fund this without having an impact, because I do think I'm interested there. So the answer can come back after the break. I'm hoping I can get the answer by after the break, but that's I'd like to hear some more about that, just to figure out what cards we have to play on this should we want to proceed. So with that, I'll call a recess. Sorry, what's that? Councillor Stoner, do you have a question?
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, go ahead. We're here to get our questions answered. So go ahead.
Just thinking as we start to go into public engagement, I suspect that there's two items that we'll get a lot of questions about if we haven't already. And they're not in this year's budget, but they're at the end of the 5-year financial plan. And those are the placeholders for the pool and for the ice rink. And I'm just wondering if staff can speak to what those placeholders are meant for and what the expectation is with that $8.8 million for each of those line items, so that council and our community can be clear on what those placeholders are for.
Thank you, through the mayor. Those placeholders are for the design and initial planning for the pool and the rink. Just to clarify, those figures do not represent the total cost of either of those assets.
But 8 million must be more than just design, correct?
Sorry, one more time, Councillor Stoner.
8 million must be more than just design.
We're going to have that question answered after the break. Just to get it flushed out. Do you want to take that as well or after? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to break. We had 30 minutes on our schedule for a break, so we'll take that now. That way there's perhaps a chance that the staff can huddle and get a break before we come back. So we'll see you back at 4 o'clock. Welcome back, everybody. We're just back from a short recess to take a break, but also to give staff time to research some questions that weren't able to address right away. So I will turn it back to staff. I'm not quite sure. I'm looking for direction. Who's going to start us with that? Would you like to, or have an order sorted? Okay, over to staff. We'll see where it goes.
Thank you, through the mayor. To follow up regarding the question around the example of the signage at Brennan Park, staff really appreciate the background on how that current signage that's up for replacement was donated in the past. What we think council's referring to is a sponsorship policy. And respectfully, that's not something that's currently included in today's budget or relevant for today's discussion. So we'd actually recommend referring that to a future discussion of council. For the other council question, just to expand on the council question regarding the 2029 amounts for the second rink and swimming pool, the amounts that are included in the financial plan, those are an indicative budget, and they include estimates for design and pre-construction, pre-planning. It's really important to note that those amounts are currently unfunded. They've been included in the financial plan to indicate to the community that staff and council are thinking about the new pool and rink and planning for it, and to ensure that the district is ready to apply for and accept any grant funding if and when it becomes available.
A couple more questions that were posed, but needed a bit more time. The question around the Chikai and Cheakamus confluent sediment removal. Apologies, that was, we misspoke. That is actually funded by reserve. It was confused with the Chikai barrier capacity funding. Then in terms of the council contingency, staff were able to understand how much is left in the 2024 budget. The total budget is $50,000 and there's $38,000 left in 2024. The 2024 budget cannot be moved forward into 2025. However, if the utilization for the chamber grant writing program was utilized in 2024, there would be enough money at the 38,000 for that in 2024, and certainly council can consider it for 2025 as well. I believe that is all the questions that were addressed.
I'm going to start just on the council contingency piece. If we were to, I know we can't like roll it, carry it over, but if it was to, if we were to through a different process, just a wish to fund a grant writing program in 2025, could we write could we transfer the funds in 2024 for that 25 initiative and still be on side, or is that's the clarity that I was looking for there? And perhaps you tried to get it in your comments, but I didn't get it.
Thank you for further clarity. No, the 2024 budget can only be utilized in 2024. The 25 budget is reset at 50,000, and certainly council can consider it within that 2025 budget.
Okay, thank you. And which reserve was the debris, the Chikai? That was the initial question. Which reserve or which pot of money does that funding come from?
Thank you for the question. It's the Capital General Fund Reserve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, on this, thanks for the clarity around council reserve. Any unused amount of council reserve goes into the general operating fund carry forward for the following year though, correct?
Any unused funds from the general fund will not, or any of the reserves will stay within the reserves. They just aren't drawn against for funding.
So in theory, we could add, if council supported the grant writing program, we could fund it from the general operating reserve. In theory, that would be a flow through of that 38,000 from 2024 council contingency.
That would be a budget amendment we would have to add that. A contingency is already a line item in the budget that's utilized for whatever the council chooses to use it for. To add a line that's funded by a reserve needs to be a budget line.
But the mechanism to fund it could be we could direct that to be funded by the reserve.
The general fund policy is not to utilize items such as this for expenditures. That is what the council contingency is made up of.
Okay, thank you. Other questions about what these answers or other? Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, just sorry. The comment about the placeholder in terms of Brennan Park and the pool, it's planning and pre-construction. Can I just get a reminder of what pre-construction would include as opposed to planning?
Thank you. Through the mayor. It could include a number of things, including site prep, also looking at additional capital assets that may be required. There's any number of different things. This is an indicative amount that's been put forward should grant opportunities become available.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just would like to add for further clarity that this is a multi-year project, and this will be the first year that starts with a multi-year project. So that is a phase one or a step one. So it could include pre-construction, it could be planning, it can include part one, but it is thought to be a multi-year project. So it needs to be spaced out, and our financial plan ends in 2029.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I just want to. I expect this is something that we will get questions about, so I want to be able to define these terms well as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the clarity on the large sums, the 950,000 and the 8 million, the two sums of 8 million each in the budget as what they're allocated under grant funded. And that we have some items, other line items within our budget that are grant funded, but they are like phase one of Brennan Park, secured grant funding, whereas this is unsecured or optimistic grant funding. Is there any way for us or folks to distinguish the difference between grant funding that we have and grant funding that we hope to maybe have in our budget?
Thank you through the chair. Thank you for the question. One of the budget improvements that we intend to do is to have an unfunded section. Currently, we cannot do that in Questica as of now, but that is something that we will be endeavoring to do. Until then, it is about communication and just letting the public know that this is a indicative budget, that this is for intention purposes and to get the district grant fund ready.
And on these two items, the ice rink and the pool, our existing tax increases that we're seeing in the next 4 years, those do not include that expenditure. If we were to include that expenditure as either debt funded or tax funded, those estimates for the next 5 years would go up considerably more. Correct?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, that's correct. So two part of that, it is currently not impacting tax or debt whatsoever. In the future, if it were to become debt funded or grant funded, not grant funded, for it to be debt funded, future years, not within this 5 year, when that debt is realized, would impact tax.
And thank you. I'll go to Councillor Pettingill next. So I just follow up on this point. I agree with the approach of doing what we can through grant funding, but to be successful at grants takes quite a bit of work to plan and apply. depending. And I just wondered where that work is accounted for. Is that just part of a normal work plan to be applying? Does it have its own piece allocated to it? Because it seems like those two pieces are so ambitious. I just wonder how we're accounting for that, or what staff's perspective is on that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. So at this point, it would stay under staff in terms of the beginning research. Once we get into a pre-construction and truly a planning stage of it, that would be likely when we would move into consulting. If it's consulting, anytime there's consulting or operational type work that can be part of a capital asset, it will then be capitalized. So it would become part of the capital project.
But the putting together the grant application, that type of work, does that just covered in sort of the daily operations of the organization, or is there another specific sort of swell in capacity to achieve that, given the size of it?
At this point, it's considered part of operations, but as we get closer, there is a possibility that we will have to increase that in order to, and we'd likely be around consulting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton? No, Pettingill, sorry. I knew it was off to my left.
Yeah, thanks. Just something in the conversation made me wonder, is it possible to have and not the whole thing, but a second scenario? We've talked about, we're seeing a scenario now where, we don't have an unfunded bucket, but we have this concept of these indicative estimates and sort of assuming that there might be a grant, or that would be the hope or the plan. So that's one scenario. Could we see a scenario like a sheet, like here's a scenario if we funded it from tax, just so we can have that conversation so people sort of understand more concretely the cost of these things? And of course, we're planning and hoping to do it from grants, but if we didn't, here's like just a starting cost to get this off the ground to serve our conversations. Is that a reasonable ask?
Thank you for the request through the chair. Yeah, I believe that would be reasonable and certainly part of the decision-making framework in terms of how we pursue the funding.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So sorry, but just for clarity, for the public engagement upcoming, to have that scenario, or is that sort of a bit too much?
I would say at this point that the numbers are a little bit too far out, and a little bit too abstract, if is a correct word at this point, because it is a longer multi-year, and staff haven't turned their mind to the full impact. I think from a public engagement being in a few days, that will not be possible.
Okay. Other questions? We maybe this is a good time to remind everyone that we're working towards the staff recommendation or some alternate. So, Councillor Stoner, yeah, go ahead.
All right, one more point of clarification on the grant writing program for the chamber. We added that in the 5-year financial plan last year under taxation for 5 years. So what has happened to that line item? Increase that we allocated last year to cover that.
Thank you. Through the mayor, as the economic development department priorities were solidified, that funding was pulled out to prioritize other economic development initiatives. And that presentation was provided to council, but I recognize it was a long time ago, and in between that, we have had a lot of information come your way. So apologies that that wasn't refreshed.
Okay, council, any other questions? We do have, and we were working towards contemplating the staff recommendation or something similar. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. As we approach the possibility of staff recommendation, I'd like to, before putting forward a motion on removing the $1.3 million from the Public Works facility for 2026, I'd just like to ask staff or corporate officer, would it be better to have a motion that explicitly removes this for now, or would it be better to have an amendment to the motion, which is clearer? By that I mean the amendment to the staff recommendation.
Okay, so I guess the question is what achieves that? If that was your goal, someone's goal, what's the best way to capture that? A separate motion specifically on that item, or have it rolled into the main motion, which is the staff recommendation? Do you have a preference?
You could do it either way. It's probably cleaner to do a standalone motion and then staff have that to work from.
I agree with I concur with that. I think having this separate, then we can deal with that matter and then move on to the rest of it. Go ahead.
So if there are no further questions from council on the budget, I'll put forward a motion to remove the $1.3 million allocated for 2026 in the, I'll get the line item here. Public Works Facility Replacement line item 526-00101 until such a time that we hear detailed explanation of the reasoning for the budget increase.
Is there a seconder for the motion? No takers to second the motion, so we'll move on. If there's any other changes, perhaps we can do it that way. If anyone else would like to see a change or the staff recommendation, and entertain all of that. Yes, you can. No motion on the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the mayor, and appreciate your patience as staff work to answer all of these questions getting volleyed at us. What I didn't clarify in terms of the grant writing position was that it was reduced during the spring amendment, the budget spring amendment. So that's when it officially came out of the budget.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to go Councillor Greenlaw and then Penningill.
Yeah, I just I wanted to ask another question of staff, so going all over the place here. I was wondering if staff could speak to any potential implications of removing the line item C5650601, the downtown paid parking implementation.
To the chair, so if that line item is removed, there won't be budget to implement paid parking in 2025. We are currently working on a project to explore what the next steps are, and so yeah, the recommendations from that could carry forward in the future, but there wouldn't be budget to implement it in 2025.
And I'm wondering also, because, when we were talking about priorities for council, downtown paid parking was one of them, implementation, but then the other one was the traffic calming piece. And I noticed that the traffic calming piece got, I think, $120,000 in this budget. And
I can jump in. So the traffic calming budget has been built into the annual transportation upgrades line item, which is intended as a bit of a more of a catch-all transportation improvement that will follow the directions from the transportation master plan, which will be coming forward in the coming weeks. So there's still money in that. It's just not identified as its own sub-project for traffic calming.
Yeah, we can come back to you if you need. So go ahead, Councillor Penningill.
Yeah, just on this point, because I guess one of my thoughts is, again, and related to some of the questions I was asking earlier. Intuitively, I think I'd rather spend more than 120, get more than just signs for traffic calming and speed reduction. It sounds like there is maybe more money set aside for some of the physical changes. And I guess for me, sort of understanding which of these pieces we attempt, it's sort of important to understand above and beyond signs for traffic calming, what are we anticipating for the budget we have, or how do we understand that? Because I do have a sort of some mind to that $600,000 for paid parking is actually maybe better spent, given all the priorities, on some physical changes for traffic calming. But I'm not sure if that, it sounds like maybe there's money already there for that.
Yeah, through the chair. So we have $700,000 in the annual transportation upgrades sub-project, and that's to capture transportation improvements that are not defined as major projects. So we have other major projects such as the downtown entrance or the Pemberton Laurelwood Bridge that are defined as their own sub-project. One of the opportunities with upcoming speed limit reduction is we'll want to ensure that our decisions are supported by the data that we'll be looking to collect as well. And so with the direction that council decides to take as far as speed limit reduction, we are also coming forward with an updated traffic calming policy, which will be presented to council at the same time in November. And that will help us inform decisions moving forward as far as what traffic calming features will be implemented. And so we do have some budget to implement some improvements, but would want to quantify the time and due diligence to ensure that we're understanding what speed limit reduction impact is on its own and what follow-ups traffic calming features wouldn't be needed to support further reductions.
Okay, and I'm trying not to just get into a future conversation, but this 700,000, I understand the wisdom of sort of having all the analysis to make sure we're spending the right money in the right place and so on and so forth. But we've also talked about Victoria and Depot Road and some changes around there. Are those projects competing for the 700,000?
Through the chair, no, those are sort of more major transportation projects that have their own sub-project and would be delivered through their sub-projects in the financial plan.
Go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
I'd like to test the motion.
Go ahead.
I'd like to have oh my God, hold on a second. To have line item C5650601 downtown paid parking implementation removed from the financial plan, and I will speak to it if seconded.
We're not seeing any takers for this one. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill. Are you seconding it? Okay, go ahead.
At this point in time and in this kind of fiscal reality, I think our money and staff resources are best used on increased enforcement of our current 2-hour limit parking for downtown, effectively increasing our revenue from parking. That's probably not the correct language. Don't judge me, Ms. Bogsroot. I'm sure, but I think it would be prudent to see how increased enforcement impacts parking use. And also, as we see cost increases, as we are seeing these cost increases associated with growth, for instance, the increased costs of policing and firefighting resources, I think removing some non-essential items, such as this paid parking implementation, could alleviate some of the cost pressures to our tax base.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill, I'll go to you as the seconder, and then I'll go to Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, again, I'm a little bit torn here, and there's a part of me that wants to think on it after I've heard from the public. But I have similar hesitations, and as I again alluded to in my earlier questions, the incremental benefit of paid parking over the 2-hour and the increased enforcement we've seen, not sure what the incremental benefit is. I know there's a revenue hope, but that is a little ways off. And when I also think about our staff capacity and so on, I do wonder if it's better to save that budget or put it towards, and it gives me some comfort to know there's some money actually for physical traffic calming, but to maybe reallocate some of that there. And also, again, not wanting paid parking to distract, and this is to be the topic of the next election, which I think deserves a lot more focus on some bigger picture things, and just sort of mindful of not wanting to set up the sort of scenario we've seen where other municipalities where other key issues just get ignored over one sort of hot button issue, which isn't the issue. I'm just not sure I want to go there. And it feels like with capacity and so on, that's where we may be headed. So that's some of the hesitation I'm having. So yeah, I may be at the not yet, but in a week or two, I might be at this place. I'm not sure.
Okay, Councillor Stoner, then Anderson.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would strongly encourage my council colleagues to vote down this motion. I think it's important to keep this as a placeholder in our budget for 2025. We've identified it as a priority for this council and past councils to start actually charging for free public parking and using our streets for cars in order to support many of the things that are challenging and putting pressure on our budgets, in particular increasing providing alternative forms of transportation downtown. And one way to pay for those increases in transit is to start charging for parking. There are ways around ensuring that folks who have accessibility issues, perhaps resident parking programs, actually have access to parking that they need. But right now, the parking that is available downtown for free, we know is being utilized for folks who have access to garages in their homes, and they're parking in spaces for long-term, and that could be used for turnover parking for folks who are actually frequenting the businesses downtown. So I think that this is one of the few line items in our budget that is actually revenue neutral over a few years. Enforcement for parking costs money. Enforcement for speed limit reduction costs money. And if we want to actually be able to effectively implement any of those outcomes, we need to find different ways to generate some levels of revenue. And I think paid parking downtown, as well as deploying paid parking in places like Darrell Bay, which we know is being heavily utilized by visitors and by wood fiber employees, there should be paid parking there. And we don't have any paid parking there right now. And the way to do it is to actually follow through with this work that we've identified as a priority of our council.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this motion for the reason that I think that the paid parking implementation initiative is part of a suite of tactics that we are going to be exploring. And we have other initiatives that we've discussed in the past and may come forward again relating to facilities and other transportation demand management. But this is where we can make a start and engage the public. I will like to note that there is discussion in the staff report attached as in the paid parking implementation report that, quote, surplus revenue allocation recommendations are provided in the 2023 parking study and include. In fact, what is said here is included in there is not in alignment with that 2023 study, and in particular with respect to a surplus revenue allocation. The study referred to does not recommend allocating money to transit, but rather to other measures, and I won't list them, particular to the downtown area affected. I think it's an important topic, and this matter of revenue allocation will come up inevitably in our public and stakeholder engagement. It's an important one. There's also reference in the recommendations of that 2023 study to business improvement areas and parking benefit areas. I only mention this because, again, I think it's important we get underway with this tactic, with this program, so that we can engage on each of these issues, and they will be important for the following measures that may follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I won't be supporting the motion, and I highly encourage my council colleagues to also not support it. I'd like to encourage all my council colleagues to, one of the pieces of reading that really helped deepen my understanding of parking infrastructure in the municipal context is a book called The High Cost of Free Parking. It is an extraordinarily well-written academic work somebody who has studied parking and the impacts of effectively free parking and municipally zoned parking throughout the U.S., but it similarly applies to Canada. It has fundamentally changed the way we design our spaces, our urban spaces. Having people pay an appropriate price for the choice to drive your vehicle is simply something that we need to start doing if we want to start having our infrastructure actually have our citizens actually consider the cost of the infrastructure that they are choosing to use. So I sincerely hope that everybody reflects deeply on what the deeper impacts of free parking has on the way we design our cities, and suggest reading High Cost of Free Parking if you haven't already done so. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor French.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Herford. I'll keep it short and sweet because I'm number 4 on this. I won't be supporting parking isn't free. This program underscores that. I want us to subsidize accessible parking downtown. Elsewhere, I think we just need to introduce the reality that parking costs money.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the motion. I think this work is important. We have heard from the community over time that that they're not happy with the way things are working in the downtown core in a parking context. And I think that stepping back from this at this point in time would be inaction on a piece of work that their community is a high priority for the community. I've also there are other pieces of this. We've had discussions recently around I think of the discussion we had at Sea and Sky. What's happening there right now is not working. Is one of the takeaways I had. We do have that new bridge coming in that we need to really understand how our community is going to move around. There was some suggestion around resident parking passes and so on. We don't have the ability to do that anywhere in the community, and I think that this work is an important, a critical piece of that. Now, as to how much is appropriate and where it should be and all the rest of it, I'm not going to comment on that because that's the work, but that's underway and will come back to us. But I do think it's an important piece of work and signifies action on an issue where we have very few levers at this point in time. And so I won't be supporting the motion. Councillor Pettingill, and then I'll go back to Greenlaw, I think.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, and I think people will see from my past voting history, I'm in general not supportive of the idea of free public parking. But when I think about the cost to actually pay for this free parking, I'm worried about the timing of this resulting in paid parking for a year and then it getting rolled back. And because we're not being thoughtful about how we engage in the timing and the rollout. My other thing, if we think about what problem paid parking solves, it's meant to keep the parking moving. So you're only there an hour or two, you don't stay because it's expensive, and so that helps businesses and so on. But it doesn't address the concern that we hear from waterfront and so on, where people want long-term, free, cheap, easy parking. This is not meant to solve that problem. So we're not going to address the concern people are raising through the paid parking. It addresses a different problem, which is an important one. And so yeah, that's my hesitation. I'm very much in favor and want to get there. I'd also say I think Darrell Bay thus far hasn't been talked about as part of this. I think that is a critical issue that we need to address in the short term. From my perspective, that's a separate topic, but and I'm still undecided. I would sort of like to hear from the public, but we may not have that opportunity.
I'd also remind that as much as this budget item is, we're here in the budget context, there's still the endorsing of the actions that these funds would take. So this isn't discussing it here is not a approval of all actions, whatever they may be, that are proposed in the staff report forthcoming. So I think we have another touch point on this, but I just want to make sure that context is clear for the community and for ourselves as we're having this part of this discussion. Did you go ahead?
Yeah, just a couple comments to add. I would caution council not to necessarily see this as a guaranteed revenue generator. I just want to point out that Tofino recently implemented paid parking, thinking it would be, an income generator. And I believe in the first year it lost over $80,000. And respectfully, I would argue that our current residents are intimately acquainted with the costs of infrastructure as they see their cost of living repeatedly and taxation repeatedly escalating year over year for the foreseeable future. And as for it being a luxury to park their car somewhere, again, the vast majority of families and people who live in this community need to commute to Vancouver. And though I get ideally it would be wonderful if we had high paying jobs within our community that supported people taking active transportation, as I hope many people in this room do, to their workplace, that is just unfortunately not a reality for most people in this town. So that was just where I was coming from. This is another additional cost that will be taken on by our residents.
I'm gonna call the. Go ahead.
I just want to, I think we've asked, my recollection, we've asked our staff a few times about the number of commuters, and there's been some different numbers, but I don't recall any time it's been the majority. It's been, in around 20% or 10%, or it depends and it varies, but I just want to make sure there's clarity, and maybe we need to ask that question a bit more formally, but I just wanted to be cautious about assuming that the majority of people are commuting, because I don't believe that's actually true.
Okay. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? So Councillor Anderson, Hamilton, Pettingill, Mayor Herford, Councillor French, and Councillor Stoner. Opposed? Motion fails. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I had I guess it's a point of order piece. I kind of want to go back to Councillor Hamilton's motion. Can we do that? Can he read it again? Does that work?
Hold on one second. Yeah, so the motion wasn't seconded, but if you try again, he's welcome to try again if you're interested in.
All right, I'd like to put a motion on the floor that we remove the $1.3 million allocated for the Public Works facility in 2026. Do you need the line number? No. Great.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Go ahead, Councillor. So would you speak to your motion, then I'll go to you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Greenlaw, for seconding the motion. My reasoning here is not that I don't believe that we should be spending, or that it's not that I oppose the extension of the budget by $1.3 million, but I believe it is our responsibility as a council to clearly understand when we have a budget increase, when we have cost escalations, particularly on our largest capital infrastructure piece in our 5-year plan. I think it is our responsibility to clearly understand where those cost escalations are happening before we support the numbers coming into budget. I understand there have been many reasons, many hiccups along the path here, and there are many reasons why staff need some time to give us these numbers, but I believe it's our responsibility to not add those numbers to our budget until we clearly understand why they're being added. Thanks.
Good. Councillor Greenlaw, would you like to speak to it as seconder?
Yeah, well, basically what Councillor Hamilton just said. I do think it's important to, one of the big problems that is kind of universal to humanity is in large scale projects, you do see cost escalations and cost creep. And on projects that we deal with on a municipal basis, those can be quite high creeps. And the only way to kind of start truncating that is being more firm with your budget allocation. So that's why I'm seconding it.
Thank you. But Councillor Stoner, then Pettingill.
Thank you. Through the chair, I won't be supporting the motion on the floor. I appreciate 100% where my council colleague is coming from and agree with many of the sentiments. I think for me, this is an issue of timing and when we're going out to public engagement. So while We don't have all the detail that I wish we had in this draft budget. It is a budget that's going out to community engagement, and we're going to get additional information at the start of December before we go to readings. I think it would do our community a disservice to take those items out and present a lower tax increase to then have a really short turnaround with additional information from staff that would potentially result in a tax increase that we didn't have the opportunity to do fulsome community engagement on. So for me, this is a timing issue more than anything. I agree with the concept and the comments of Councillor Hamilton. But I think realistically, I'd like this to be part of the discussion that we go out to community with in terms of community engagement for our overall budget, knowing that that number may change and we still have the opportunity to remove it when more information becomes available.
Councillor Pettingill, I'm going to come back around at the end to Councillor Hamilton. There may be other points you might want to address. I'll give you that opportunity before we call the vote. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess from what I've heard, it's maybe in some ways a 6 1 half dozen of the other. It sounds like the proposal is either we keep it in and then maybe take it out, or we take it out now and maybe put it back in 3 weeks. And so it's sort of which way do we do it? And so I'm a little bit torn. I'm not sure it matters that much. So just sort of, if I've misstated what the proposals are, would love to hear. Otherwise, I will contemplate which way is better.
I won't be supporting the motion, but I do support the intent. And I agree with Councillor Stoner's assessment. I think if we go to the public with a number that is artificially low and then have to slip something in at the end, which is how this would likely be framed, to a pessimistic observer, I think that would be disingenuous. So I think that I share the concerns, and I will absolutely be looking for those details and that justification before advancing readings. And I think that's the appropriate time to push on this item in this way. When I think about transparency to the community and having a realistic, fulsome conversation about where we are, we need to go with the best information that we have, which is this at this point, and then that next touch point and going into readings is where where this action I think is best situated, should it be appropriate at that time. Right now, I'm not comfortable with this, but I'm also not comfortable with the entirety of the project. So I'm aligned that way. It's just how we address that in my mind, and I don't think that this is the mechanism to do that.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. I think that 2 words you've just used really sum up why I won't be supporting this motion: realistic and transparency. This is a project that has been very frustrating from day one, when members of our community decided on principle that they didn't want to approve the funding process that we originally set out to use when this was budgeted at $17 million. And to go the route that's proposed, I think it puts us in a place where we're not being completely transparent about the reality of the budget amount that we're looking at for this project. I too respect the spirit of what's happening here, and I think it's great that we collectively are looking for ways to trim down the 2025 budget. I just don't think that this is one of the ways to go about doing that.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Anyone? I was going to anyone we haven't heard from. Do you want to go, Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I will also not be supporting the motion, although I think it's an important gesture that Councillor Hamilton has done in bringing forward this motion. It's sending the signal and allowing us to present give the impression that we are going to be duly diligent about this. For the reasons of timing and transparency, as already been spoken to, I won't be supporting it this time.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to follow up. To my council colleagues, reminder, this is for the 2026 budget. There will be a considerable number of changes from what is listed in our currently listed in our 2026 budget to when we sit in these seats a year from now. This will be one of many changes that may appear in next year's budget. The importance, and to the question of whether this is 6 one or half dozen the other, ultimately it is. I do hope that when we see the presentation on the details, that we will support, that we will see clear justification for this increase in of the budget. But it is I still believe it is our responsibility to not approve, even implicitly approve, a cost escalation until we've seen the reasoning behind it. So on that, yeah. Anyways, I hope my council colleagues can see that the principle at play here, we don't have many opportunities to hold a moment of account. And this is a moment we can hold account in a way that, should we agree to allow it after seeing the details, we can do so in December. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Anderson, French, Stoner, and Mayor Herford oppose. Motion fails. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Just a process question, because, we're going out to engagement and we may sort of hear new things that change our mind. Are we into motions of reconsideration for things that we decide today and
No,
vote out?
where we are at so from what we have, from what we leave here with, although we do have a staff recommendation we have yet to deal with. So whatever we leave this meeting with is where the conversation we're having with the community. The next steps are that conversation with the community, and then also reporting back formally to council and the community what we heard, and then consideration of readings there. So it's at consideration of readings is where we commit at that point, which is still a ways off, and there's touch points along that way. So no, there's not reconsideration of these. It's dealing with those motions. The recommendation we have here is that council direct staff to proceed with the budget open house and using this referencing the draft 2025-2029 financial plan as presented in the report. That's the piece. So any of these other conversations we can absolutely come back to essentially in the same way at readings, if we see fit, or any other topic that contained within. Yes, Councillor French.
If we're collectively ready for the staff recommendation, I'd like to move it.
I will second that. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, please. So last night, Councillor Pettingill and Councillor Hamilton and I, we attended a coffee with council. There was no coffee consumed. It was a little late in the evening. But we got some great feedback from 3 members of our community. Maybe we could have done a better job of getting the word out that was happening. Nonetheless, there's another coffee with council tomorrow, and then a third on Thursday. I don't have the info and details right at hand, but if there's anybody out there that's interested in attending those, I encourage you. And I also see this particular open house event on November the 7th as one of the key pieces of the budget process. And I'm hoping that those who have thoughts on our 5-year financial plan and this budget process that we're in to come out and give us the feedback that we haven't already heard and that we have already heard, because it doesn't hurt for us to hear 3 or 4 or 5 times the various budget concerns that our residents have and want us to focus on.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Pettingill, then Anderson.
Yeah, thanks. I will be supporting this motion. There are a few things that I'm not yet comfortable with, but I want to hear from the public, for one, before I make any more changes. A couple of reflections. I think in general, Squamish has gentrified, and we are overall, compared to much of BC and Canada, a very affluent place overall. And again, I'm generalizing here, but you know, realistically, if you're living in Squamish and have a high mortgage or high rent, and you know, trouble parking with your garage full of toys and so on, overall, we're in a pretty fortunate position. And I think in that context, and in terms of what many people in our country are struggling with to just get a roof over their house, I'm not sure that I'm fairly comfortable with what we see for this year as an overall picture. And I think, you know, supporting things like transit, library, putting the money aside in our asset management makes a lot of sense. We have been, in my analysis, both in absolute numbers and as a percentage, in the bottom third of BC communities for tax increases over the last many years. Now we're sort of hitting the average, and it's a bit of a shock, but we're sort of at the average. So overall, I think we're still doing well. Having said that, 2026 and 2027 are a bit more of a concern, and I haven't figured out yet how to tackle those pieces, but that's where I have a bit more hesitation. And the irony is, because each year's tax increase is expressed in terms of the year before, the more work we do to pull down this year, the worse 2026 looks. And so it's sort of an irony there when 2026 is the one I have the most sort of concern about at this point. In terms of specific things in this year, though, the Brennan Park Gym, I'm not sure from what I've heard and seen that that's a strong thing I want to fund. The tennis and pickleball landscaping, I would, to be honest, like to understand a little bit more. From my view, the land is pretty flat and so on, so I'm not clear on the stability piece. And I think we've seen the cricket folks and so on get some other fundraising and so on. And so I wonder if maybe there's some opportunities there. I've said it before, the RCMP facility spending, absent of some reasonable risk and consequence analysis in proximity to the pipeline, is a concern for me. And I'm just looking for a 1 to 2 pager. I'm building a list of people who can do that if that's an interest. So I'm not in-depth study, but before we invest, my understanding is there's significant consequence and possible risk along this. And so before we put municipal money into that, I'd like that understanding. But for now, and going into public consultation, I'm comfortable with what we have, and I appreciate all the work and answers to questions and all the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
I too am in favor of bringing the current package forward for public engagement. I'd like to make a couple of general comments. Our finance department put forward a slide and spoke to it earlier this afternoon. It was titled Key Efforts to Minimize Costs, and there were a number of tactics and strategies that were outlined in that slide and spoke to by Ms. Boxrud. One item or a theme, though, I think is underemphasized, and both in the financial plan and in our work plan, and it's a theme that comes straight out of our council strategic plan, and I'll read it out. It's under the outcome resilient people and relationships is our desired outcome, and the objective is build relationships with community groups to increase community capacity and resources by the end of our term. The relevance of that to the budget, well, I think we can save some money, and I'm going to give some 2 examples. Last week, Mr. Veleniskis spoke to the heritage statements of significance, a line item in last year's budget that's been removed. And he explained that we'd taken them out of the financial plan, given the workload and staff workload, staff capacity, and other priorities, namely the archaeological assessment. In the description for this project last year, it states this budget includes professionally prepared statements of significance, and it's that professionally prepared I'd like to speak to. It also refers to research sources, maps, archival and current photos, and other documentation. Well, my point is that this all already today and will in future come from volunteers and nonprofit organizations and our library. To quote from the Heritage Register document for West Vancouver, the statements of significance should be drafted by community volunteers. Mission Community Heritage Commission, made up of volunteers. They're in charge. They're tasked to create and maintain a heritage register and look after these statements of significance. The other example I'm going to refer to was part of past year's budgets, probably 2 years ago, and that is follow up on the shared leadership and governance theme in the Marine Action Strategy. We haven't seen a line item on that theme for quite a while. And to my mind, it's another area of an example of partnerships of and with stakeholders that can save us money and deliver resources and community capacity. For example, in 2007, a management plan was completed for the estuary wildlife management area entirely by volunteers, meeting over a period of 2 years. They were facilitated by the province, Squamish Nation, and all levels of government were present. The minutes were taken by the district. The work was done by volunteers. I think we are missing out in not giving attention to the opportunity to, as our council strategic plan points to, building relationships with community groups and looking at the role of volunteers and nonprofits in delivering what we want to deliver. I'll leave it at that. I would, however, like to add one more point arising from last week's discussions, Mayor Herford, and that is a bit of a mea culpa. I made some comments regarding the major public art piece purchase and a $300,000 item for 2025. And I made some comments and raised some concerns, some of which I still hold. However, I was not informed that this budget had been a fund that had been implemented years back. And I really have to credit staff for since putting information out to the public and explaining that feature of this line item, that this is a reserve fund that had been assembled over a period of years. And I think kudos to staff on that for straightening out that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, and then Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thanks very much. I will be supporting the motion on the floor, as you know, for my motion about the extended funding of the Public Works building. I'm not completely in alignment with everything that appears on the budget, but I do see staff has done a lot of work. Staff has a very difficult job of trying to rein in our municipal budget as best they can while delivering as best they can on all of our community's needs. So I really want to encourage the public to come and talk to us, communicate with us, particularly if there's a line item, if there's something you don't see of value to your to you, you don't see how that's how we should be spending money on that, please let us know. That doesn't necessarily mean that it comes out, but we need to understand where our community's priorities are, and it's through the community communicating with us that we understand that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I too will be supporting the motion on the floor. I think that this budget is very fulsomely ready for public engagement, and I look forward to hearing from as many folks as possible through the various ways to engage with council, either through coffee with council, the budget engagement night, Let's Talk Squamish, or directly feel free to email us. These are really difficult numbers, both this year and looking forward to the next 2 years, where we're looking at close to 15% tax, well, close to 16% tax increase before non-market change next year. And a big driver of that is the changes in debt servicing. Appreciate staff who brought back the difference in the projected 5-year budget from last year and where we are. What I took away from that is that there has been a shift in when that debt servicing has actually come to fruition. So when it was expected to come out this year for the Public Works facility, it's been pushed back by a year. And that gap, if 3% debt servicing, has actually been filled this year by service level increases, which then get amortized into pre-committed levels for next year. And so this is a really challenging, I think, area where council has to wrestle with whether we feel comfortable with those service level increases going forward, because that's really what's hitting the impact of the budget next year. And as Councillor Hamilton said, look forward to hearing on specific line items if there's elements that the community feel like are not core priorities at the moment, how we either delay or move those in order to make sure that we are really delivering on what people are expecting of us. No doubt it's a challenging time as we try and replace our municipal infrastructure. Folks have heard us say this time and time again. We don't want to whittle down our budgets to the point where we are doing a disservice to future councils. But we do want to recognize the difficult times that everybody is living through in our community right now. Everybody's feeling the push of inflation, and that is on our budgets as well. And so it's a heavy budget for sure, and I look forward to engaging the community on it in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Greenlaw, would you like to make a comment? No. I'm speaking in support of the motion. I think, I've said that, I've said it before and I'll say it again here, that I think nearly every conversation that I have with the community is a budget conversation when I boil it right down to the topic. And this is where this budget represents sort of the compiling of all those conversations, whether they're individually to council or the community participating in one of our many engagement activities. So I think public engagement is what has formed a large part of what has gotten us to this point, and really is the entire point of the next phase of this process. So I look forward to speaking with the community about where we've landed, and the compromises that we've made inside the draft budget as it sits, and any potential reprioritization that should occur between here and readings. I share my colleagues' concerns, and I really appreciate the conversation earlier around public works. I do think that those, I'm not all the way there yet on this on the escalation piece, but I do think it's important that we have that we communicate out the largest number we have before us, and await those details as we consider the inclusion of that escalation in readings. Also, believe it or not, I may be my own worst critic, but as I was working my way through this document and trying to take it all in, I was like, oh man, there's still pieces I don't know. And as I look out here, for those of you that can't see, we've got approximately 40 support staff here to answer all of our questions. So I really encourage everyone in the community to come out to the budget engagement event, where we'll have many of these minds there as well to answer the questions, as much as myself and my council colleagues do our very best to understand every particular item and initiative this budget represents. A huge thank you to staff for the work that goes into this budget and supporting us and the community through the process. So thank you very much. I hope to see a better turnout at upcoming Coffee with Councils, and as well as the budget engagement event coming up. Is that next week already? Coming up shortly. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. I'm looking for a motion to terminate. Councillor Stoner, thank you very much for that. And Councillor Hamilton seconds. All in favor? Any opposed? Didn't think so. Thank you very much, everybody.